The sound of their laughter still haunts me. Not the kind of laughter that warms a room. No, this was different. This was the sound of hyenas circling fresh meat, and I was bleeding out right there beside my father's casket. I remember the exact moment everything shattered. The funeral director was still adjusting the flowers when I heard my stepmother Rebecca's voice drift from behind the marble pillar. Her words sliced through the church air like a blade through silk. Thank God the old fool is finally gone. Now we can sell that eyesore of a house and split the real money. My brother Marcus's deep chuckle followed. $3 million from the life insurance alone, plus the business assets. We'll be set for life, Becca. I pressed myself against the cold stone, my black dress suddenly feeling like it was suffocating me. The roses on Dad's casket seemed to wilt before my eyes as I listened to them dissect his life like vultures. What about Sarah? Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper, but in the empty church, whispers carried like screams. What about her? Marcus scoffed. She gets the house, that money pit, and whatever pocket change Dad left her. We made sure of that when we had him update the will last month. The floor beneath me felt like it was giving way. Last month, when Dad was barely conscious from the chemo, when I was sleeping in hospital chairs, holding his hand through another round of treatment. Rebecca's laugh was sharp as glass. Poor little Sarah. She actually thinks Daddy loved her most. If only she knew how pathetic he thought she was. 32 and still single, still living in that tiny apartment, still waiting for her big break as a writer. My hand started shaking. Not from grief, but from rage so pure it felt like lightning in my veins. She'll figure it out soon enough, Marcus said, when the lawyers read the will tomorrow and she realizes she got less than the housekeeper. I stepped out from behind that pillar with tears streaming down my face, but my voice was steady as steel. Interesting conversation. They spun around like children caught stealing cookies, their faces cycling through shock, panic, and finally, contempt. Rebecca recovered first. She always did. Sarah, honey, you misunderstood. Did I? I walked toward them slowly, each step echoing in the sacred space. Did I misunderstand the part where you called my father a fool? Or the part where you manipulated a dying man into changing his will? Marcus stepped forward, and for a moment I saw the brother who used to protect me from bullies. Then his expression hardened into something I didn't recognize. Look, Sarah, you're emotional and not thinking clearly. Dad made his choices. He knew you'd be fine. You're strong, independent. You don't need his money. But they needed it. That thought hit me like a physical blow. They needed it because Marcus had been living beyond his means for years, and Rebecca had expensive tastes that her yoga instructor's salary couldn't support. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I am strong, and I am independent, and that's exactly why you're going to regret this. Rebecca's perfectly glossed lips curved into a smirk. What are you going to do, Sarah? Write a mean blog post about us? The laughter came back then, softer this time, but no less cruel. It followed me as I walked out of that church, past my father's casket, past the flowers that spelt out beloved father in purple and white. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I didn't scream or break down or do any of the things they probably expected. Instead, I sat in my car and made a promise to the empty sky in my father's memory. They wanted to play games with the dying man's wishes? Fine. But they had no idea who they were playing against. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Chen, and 3 days ago, I thought I knew who I was. I was the daughter who held my father's hand through 18 months of cancer treatment, the one who rearranged my entire freelance writing schedule to drive him to chemo appointments, the one who researched experimental treatments at 2 a.m. and made lists of questions for his oncologist. I was the girl who'd grown up in his bookshop, learning to love stories before I could properly read them. The teenager he'd driven 3 hours to watch perform in high school theater. The college graduate he'd cried over when I got my first byline in The Atlantic. I thought I was the daughter he'd called his little writer and his greatest achievement. Turns out, I was the fool. The will reading was exactly as brutal as they'd predicted. I sat in that sterile conference room, surrounded by mahogany and the smell of expensive leather, while Mr. Donovan, Dad's lawyer for 23 years, read the words that changed everything. To my daughter Sarah, I leave the family home at 1247 Maple Street, along with its contents and a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 for maintenance and living expenses. $50,000. The house was falling apart, needed a new roof, new plumbing, new everything. It would eat through that money in 6 months. To my beloved wife, Rebecca, and my son, Marcus, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all business assets, investments, and life insurance policies, to be split equally between them. $3 million each. I watched Rebecca dab at her eyes with a tissue while Marcus put on his best reluctant air expression. They were good, I'll give them that. If I hadn't overheard their conversation at the church, I might have believed their performance. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Rebecca whispered as we left the lawyer's office. "Your father, I think the medication affected his judgment near the end. He wasn't thinking clearly." Liar. The word burned in my throat, but I swallowed it. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. That night I drove to the house, my house now, apparently, and tried to make sense of it. The Victorian had been in our family for 3 generations. Dad used to joke that it would outlive us all, despite the creaky floors and the way the wind whistled through the window frames. Standing in his study, surrounded by his books and the faint smell of his cologne, I felt the weight of betrayal settling into my bones like an old injury that aches when it rains. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Jenna. "How are you holding up? I know today was rough." I started typing a response, then stopped. How could I explain this? That my family wasn't my family. That the people I trusted most had been playing a long game I hadn't even known existed. Instead, I typed, "I'm fine. Just need some time to process everything." But I wasn't fine. Over the next 2 weeks, as I tried to navigate my new reality, the cracks in my world kept spreading. The insurance company called. Dad's policy, the one I thought would help cover his final medical expenses, had been changed 6 months ago. Rebecca was now the sole beneficiary. The bank called. The business account for Dad's bookshop, which I assumed would be part of settling his affairs, had been cleaned out 2 days before he died. Marcus had power of attorney. The landlord called. My apartment lease was up for renewal, and without my regular income from the marketing blog I'd put on hold during Dad's illness, I couldn't afford the rent increase. Everything was connected. They hadn't just manipulated a dying man, they'd systematically isolated me, positioned themselves as the responsible ones while making me look like the flighty daughter who couldn't handle real responsibility. I was sitting in Dad's kitchen at 2 a.m., surrounded by medical bills and legal documents, when I found the first real clue. Hidden in his desk drawer, tucked inside an old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, my childhood favorite, was a letter, in Dad's handwriting, but shaky, like he'd written it when the pain was bad. "Sarah, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I suspect it wasn't the cancer. Check the blue folder in my safe. The combination is your birthday. Trust no one else with this. I'm sorry, little writer. I should have protected you better. Dad." My hands shook as I read it again. I suspect it wasn't the cancer. What did that mean? Dad had pancreatic cancer. The doctors were clear about the prognosis. But there was something in the way he'd written those words. I found the safe behind his bookshelf, hidden exactly where he'd kept it since I was a child. Inside, a blue folder contained documents that made my blood run cold. Medical records, not from his oncologist, from a different doctor. Test results showing levels of something called digitalis in his blood. High levels. Dangerous levels. And a pharmacy receipt. Not in Dad's name. In Marcus's. Heart medication. I Googled digitalis with trembling fingers. Used to treat heart conditions. Can be deadly in high doses, especially for cancer patients already weakened by chemotherapy. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of Dad's desk, my vision blurring as the pieces fell into place. They hadn't just stolen his money, they'd killed him for it. Have you ever had a moment where reality completely shifts and you realize you're living in a different world than you thought? That's what happened when I stared at those medical records. My father didn't die from cancer. He was murdered, and I was the only one who knew. The next 3 weeks were the darkest of my life. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face during those final days, how he'd seemed confused, more tired than usual, how he'd complained about dizziness and heart palpitations that the doctors had attributed to the chemo. I couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I couldn't write. The words that had always been my escape, my livelihood, my identity, they were gone. Every sentence I started felt meaningless against the magnitude of what I'd discovered. But worst of all, I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I had no proof beyond medical records that could be explained away and a pharmacy receipt that Marcus could claim was coincidental. I could see the headlines now: grieving daughter's delusional accusations, or writer creates elaborate fiction to contest father's will. Rebecca and Marcus, meanwhile, were everywhere. At the memorial service they organized without consulting me, at the bookshop, helping to close it down, at family friends' houses, accepting condolences and casseroles, while positioning themselves as the responsible children dealing with Dad's affairs. They were rewriting history in real time, and I was powerless to stop it. I lost 12 pounds, my landlord served me with an eviction notice, my biggest client dropped my contract, citing inconsistent communication and missed deadlines. I was becoming exactly what they had always said I was, a folier. One rainy Thursday, I was sitting in Dad's house, surrounded by moving boxes and despair, when the doorbell rang. I almost didn't answer it. I'd been avoiding people for weeks, letting calls go to voicemail and texts go unanswered. But something made me open the door. Standing on my porch was a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, holding a manila envelope and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sarah Chen?" she asked. I nodded, suddenly aware of how I must look. Unwashed hair, baggy clothes, dark circles that probably had their own zip code by now. "My name is Detective Maria Santos. I'm retired now, but I used to work fraud and white-collar crime. I think we need to talk about your father." My heart stopped. How did she... What did she... "May I come in?" she continued. "I have some information I think you'll want to see." I stepped aside and she entered Dad's living room like she belonged there. She looked around with the keen eye of someone accustomed to reading spaces, seeing the story they told. "You're living here now?" she asked gently. "It's all I have left," I said, and immediately hated how pathetic I sounded. She nodded, setting her envelope on the coffee table. "Sarah, I was a friend of your father's. We met at the bookshop about 2 years ago when I was researching a novel about financial crimes. He helped me understand how people hide money, move assets, create paper trails that lead to nowhere." "Novel? You're a writer?" "Retired cop turned crime writer. Cliché, I know." Her smile was warm, but her eyes remained serious. "David, your father, was incredibly helpful. We became friends, good friends. And in the last few months of his life, he was concerned about some things." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. "He asked me to look into some financial irregularities he'd noticed, transfers from his accounts that didn't make sense, changes to legal documents he didn't remember authorizing." My breath caught. "What did you find?" "Fraud. Systematic, sophisticated fraud that's been going on for almost 2 years." She spread the papers across the coffee table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. "Someone with access to your father's accounts and personal information has been slowly draining his assets and positioning themselves to inherit everything." Someone. But we both knew who. "There's more," Maria continued. "I also found irregularities in his medical care. Prescription medications filled in names that weren't his, visits to doctors he'd never seen, paid for with his insurance." I pulled out the blue folder with shaking hands. "You mean like this?" When Maria saw the medical records and pharmacy receipt, her expression went from concerned to grim. "Sarah, where did you get these?" "Dad left them for me, hidden in his safe with a note saying he suspected that it wasn't the cancer." Maria finished quietly. Yes, he came to me with those same suspicions 3 weeks before he died. He was scared. Sarah, not of dying. He'd made peace with the cancer. He was scared of what would happen to you. The tears came then, hot and desperate and full of every emotion I'd been holding back for weeks. Maria moved to the couch beside me, and for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't alone with this terrible knowledge. Why didn't you come forward before? I asked when I could speak again. I was still gathering evidence, and honestly, I hoped I was wrong. I hoped David's suspicions were just the paranoia of a sick man. She looked at the document spread between us. But this changes everything. Sarah, I think your father was murdered, and I think you're in danger too. Danger? The word hung in the air like a live wire. They got what they wanted, the money, the business, everything. Why would they hurt me? Maria's expression was grave. Because you're the only one who knew your father well enough to notice the inconsistencies. You're the only one who would have access to his personal papers, his safe, his real thoughts about what was happening to him. She paused. And because they can't afford to have you asking questions. As if to punctuate her words, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hey sis, hope you're doing okay. Rebecca and I have been thinking. Maybe it's time to consider selling Dad's house. It's just sitting there and the maintenance costs are going to eat up your inheritance. We could split the proceeds 3 ways. What do you think? I showed the text to Maria and her jaw tightened. They're moving faster now. They want you out of that house, away from whatever evidence might still be hidden there. So what do I do? The question came out like a whisper. Maria smiled. And for the first time in weeks, I saw something that looked like hope. We're going to get them, Sarah. We're going to get them all. But we have to be smart about it, and we have to be patient. She gathered the documents and put them back in the envelope. First, we're going to make sure you're safe. Then, we're going to build an airtight case. And then, her eyes glittered with something that looked like anticipation. Then, we're going to destroy them. Maria Santos wasn't just a retired detective. She was the hunter, and she'd found her prey. Over the next month, my father's house became our war room. Maria taught me how to think like an investigator, how to build a case that would stand up in court and in the court of public opinion. Rule number 1, she said, spreading crime scene photos across Dad's dining table. Document everything, every conversation, every text message, every suspicious transaction. We're not just proving they committed crimes, we're proving they did it systematically, deliberately, and without remorse. She'd brought equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie, recording devices, financial tracking software, background check databases that somehow she still had access to. Benefit of 23 years on the force, she explained when I raised an eyebrow. I know people who know people. The first breakthrough came when we traced the digitalis prescription. Marcus had used a fake ID and paid cash, but the pharmacy had security cameras. Maria's contact in the department was able to pull the footage, and there he was, my brother, buying the medication that killed our father. But that was just the beginning. Maria had me call Rebecca and Marcus, explaining that I was ready to discuss selling the house. I wore a wire Maria had gotten from somewhere I didn't ask about, and we recorded every incriminating word. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Sarah. Your father would want us all to get along. Did he ever talk to you about changing his will? It seemed so unlike him to leave me so little. Rebecca's perfect mask slipped for just a second. Oh, honey, you know how he was near the end. The medication made him paranoid. He started imagining that people were trying to take advantage of him. Imagining. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Marcus was even worse. Where I met him at the bookshop, Dad's bookshop, which they were in the process of liquidating, he couldn't resist gloating. You always were Dad's little princess, he said, boxing up first edition novels that were worth thousands. But at the end, he finally saw what I've been trying to tell him for years. You're not practical, Sarah. You live in fantasy land with your writing and your dreams. He needed to leave his legacy to people who could handle it responsibly. Is that what you told him when you convinced him to change the will? I asked. Marcus paused in his packing. I didn't convince him of anything. I just helped him see reality. Reality. Like the reality that he'd been skimming money from Dad's accounts for 18 months. Like the reality that he'd forged Dad's signature on documents when the cancer made him too weak to hold a pen. We found it all. Bank records showing regular transfers to accounts in Rebecca and Marcus's names, medical records from doctors Dad had never seen, prescriptions he'd never requested, insurance documents with signatures that handwriting analysis would later prove were forged. But Maria's masterstroke was discovering the burner phone. She explained as we sat in her car outside Marcus's apartment building. Criminals always think they're smarter than they are. They think using a second phone makes them untraceable, but they always make the same mistake. They keep both phones in the same place. We'd been surveilling Marcus for 2 weeks, learning his patterns, when Maria spotted him using a phone I'd never seen before. Through methods I decided not to ask about, she was able to clone the device and access its call history. The conversations we found were damning beyond anything I could have imagined. Marcus to Rebecca, 3 days after Dad's diagnosis. The old man's got maybe a year. We need to move fast if we're going to make this work. Rebecca to Marcus, the night before Dad updated his will. I've been working on him all week. He's confused, scared about leaving Sarah with nothing. I think he's ready to sign. And the one that broke my heart and sealed their fate. Marcus to Rebecca, the day after Dad died. It's done. He went peacefully, never suspected a thing. Sarah's going to be devastated, but she'll get over it. We're finally free. Peacefully. He thought drugging our father to death was peaceful? We have enough to bury them, Maria said after we'd compiled everything. Financial fraud, elder abuse, forgery, and murder. They'll spend the rest of their lives in prison. But I shook my head. That's not enough. Maria looked surprised. Sarah, this is everything we hoped for. Justice. Justice isn't enough, I interrupted. They didn't just steal Dad's money. They stole his final months, filled them with confusion and fear. They poisoned his last memories of me, made him think I couldn't be trusted with his legacy. My voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. They wanted to play games? Fine, but we're playing by my rules now. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what we're going to do. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. We weren't just going to expose them, we were going to let them expose themselves. First, I would appear to give them exactly what they wanted. I'd agree to sell the house, split the proceeds, and fade quietly into the background like the weak, defeated daughter they expected me to be. But behind the scenes, we were preparing for war. I had learned something important during those dark weeks after the funeral. I wasn't just David Chen's daughter, the struggling writer who lived in a tiny apartment and dreamed of bigger things. I was a storyteller, and I was about to tell the most important story of my life. The story of how Marcus Chen and Rebecca Chen murdered a good man and tried to erase his daughter. The only difference was this story wouldn't have a happy ending. At least, not for them. The final act began on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 2 months after Dad's funeral. I sat in the same lawyer's office where I'd learned about my inheritance, but this time I wasn't the confused, grieving daughter they remembered. This time I was the author of their destruction. Rebecca and Marcus arrived together, practically glowing with satisfaction. They thought today was about signing papers to sell Dad's house, about finalizing their victory over the weak little sister who'd finally accepted her place. They had no idea they were walking into a trap 2 months in the making. Sarah! Rebecca air-kissed my cheeks, her performance as loving stepmother still flawlessly maintained. You look wonderful. I'm so proud of how you're handling everything. Marcus nodded approvingly. This is the right choice, sis. Dad would be proud that we're all working together. Dad. The name hit me like it always did, but this time, instead of pain, I felt something else. Power. Mr. Donovan, Dad's old lawyer, looked uncomfortable as he arranged the papers on his conference table. Maria had visited him yesterday, armed with everything we'd discovered. He knew what was coming. Before we begin, I said, my voice steady and clear, I have something I need to share with both of you.
I pulled out a manila envelope, the same kind Maria had brought to my door all those weeks ago, and spread its contents across the polished wood surface. Bank records, medical files, prescription receipts, security camera footage printed in high-resolution black and white, and transcripts, page after page of conversations from the burner phone, every damning word preserved forever. The change in the room was instant and electric. Rebecca's perfect composure cracked like ice under pressure. Marcus went pale as winter's sky. What is this?" Rebecca whispered. "This," I said, standing up so I could look down at both of them, "is the story of how you murdered my father." Silence. The kind of silence that comes just before thunder. Marcus was the first to recover, his lawyer training kicking in. "Sarah, you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. These accusations are true," I interrupted. "Every single one of them. The digitalis poisoning that killed him while you convinced everyone it was cancer complications. The forged documents that transferred his assets to your accounts. The psychological manipulation that made a dying man question his love for his own daughter." I picked up the transcript from the burner phone, the one that had broken my heart. March 15th, 2024. "It's done. He went peacefully, never suspected a thing." Those are your words, Marcus, about our father, about the man who raised you, loved you, gave you everything. Rebecca tried to stand, her chair scraping against the floor. "You can't prove any of this. You're just a bitter, jealous—" "Sit down." The command came out like a whip crack, and to my amazement, she obeyed. This was what power felt like, not the kind they'd stolen through lies and manipulation, but the kind that came from truth, from justice, from righteous fury channeled into laser-focused purpose. "I can prove all of it," I continued. "Detective Santos and I have been building this case for 2 months. We have financial records showing systematic theft. We have medical evidence of digitalis poisoning. We have security camera footage of you buying the medication, Marcus. We have recordings of you both celebrating Dad's death and planning to divide his assets." I walked around the table, placing my hands on the back of Marcus's chair. "But most importantly, we have Dad's own words. The letter he left me telling me he suspected what you were doing. The will he wrote in his own hand, the real will, leaving everything to me and explicitly stating that if anything happened to him, I should investigate his death." That was a lie, but they didn't know that. I watched Marcus's face cycle through panic, calculation, and finally desperate anger. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if any of this were true, which it isn't, you can't prove murder. Dad was dying anyway. From cancer he might have beaten. With treatment you cut short by poisoning him. With time you stole from him and from me." My voice rose, months of suppressed rage finally finding its voice. "He wanted to see me published in a major magazine. He wanted to walk me down the aisle someday. He wanted to meet his grandchildren. You took all of that away, not just from him, but from me." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of fury, of vindication, of justice finally within reach. "The police are waiting outside. Detective Santos has spent the last week coordinating with the DA's office, the fraud division, and the homicide department. In about 5 minutes, you're both going to be arrested for conspiracy, elder abuse, financial fraud, and murder." Rebecca made a sound like a wounded animal. Marcus just stared at me, and for a moment I saw something that might have been respect in his eyes. "But first," I said, pulling out my phone, "I wanted you both to see this." I opened the news app and turned the screen toward them. The headline read, "Local siblings charged in father's murder, financial fraud and poisoning plot exposed." Below it was a photo of them both looking smug and satisfied at Dad's memorial service. It went live 20 minutes ago, along with articles in 3 other local papers, posts on every relevant social media platform, and a detailed email sent to everyone in your contact lists. Your employers, your friends, your yoga students, Rebecca, your law partners, Marcus, Everyone who ever thought they knew you now knows exactly what kind of people you really are.
Rebecca was sobbing openly now, her perfect makeup streaking down her cheeks. "Sarah, please, you don't understand. We can explain." "No," I said firmly. "You had your chance to explain. 2 months ago, when I asked you directly if there was anything I should know about Dad's final days. You chose to lie then. You chose to mock me, to diminish me, to treat me like an obstacle to be removed." I walked back to my chair and sat down, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in months. But you made one crucial mistake. You forgot that I'm a writer. And writers, we remember everything. Every slight, every betrayal, every casual cruelty disguised as concern. I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I had worn since Dad died. We remember, and we turn it all into stories. And this story, it's gonna follow you for the rest of your lives. The conference room door opened and Detective Santos entered with 2 uniformed officers. "Rebecca Chen and Marcus Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, and financial fraud." As they read Rebecca her rights, she looked at me with pure hatred. "This won't bring him back," she spat. "No," I agreed, "but it will make sure he's remembered for who he really was, a good man who loved his daughter enough to protect her from beyond the grave." Marcus didn't say anything as they cuffed him, but he kept staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was. I'm writing this from Dad's study, my study now, in the house that's no longer falling apart. The insurance money from the wrongful death lawsuit paid for the new roof, the updated plumbing, and a security system that would make Fort Knox jealous. Rebecca and Marcus are both in prison, awaiting trial. Their bail was denied after the judge deemed them flight risks. Their assets have been frozen, their reputations destroyed, their futures reduced to a series of court dates and plea negotiations. The bookshop is open again, run by a lovely woman named Elena who worked with Dad for 15 years. She kept all his favorite books in the front window, including a special display of the crime novels Maria recommended. Speaking of Maria, she's become the mother figure I never had growing up. We have coffee every Tuesday and discuss her latest book, a true crime novel about financial fraud and family betrayal. I suspect it might be a bestseller. I've started writing again, not just articles for magazines, but something bigger. A book about grief, about betrayal, about the difference between justice and revenge. My agent thinks it could be something special. But mostly, I've learned something important. About forgiveness. Not the kind that lets people off the hook for terrible things, but the kind that lets you stop carrying their poison in your heart. I forgive Dad for not seeing through their manipulation sooner. I forgive myself for not recognizing the signs. I even forgive Marcus and Rebecca, not because they deserve it, but because holding on to hatred was eating away at the person Dad raised me to be. They stole his money, his final months, his peace of mind. But they couldn't steal his love from me or mine for him. That lives on in every story I write, every book I read in his favorite chair, every time I remember his laugh or his terrible jokes or the way he used to call me his little writer. The laughter that echoed at Dad's funeral has been replaced by something else now. The sound of justice, of truth, of a daughter who refused to let her father's killers win. Their legacy lies in ashes, just like the title promised. But ours is just beginning.